in person, but hopefully I'll see you down the track later this year sometime. My name is David Royston Jennings, and I'm Council's appointed Regional Risk Coordinator through its membership with LGMS. So my job is basically to work with councils throughout Queensland by assisting them in reviewing and enhancing their risk management practices. Having spent the majority of my career working in local government, I know the council will soon be starting to consider its budget for the coming financial year. I want to take a few minutes of your time today to provide you with some information about potential risk exposures, which you may want to address as part of the formation of your budget and to join the operational plan for the coming financial year. So as experienced councillors and professionals, I'm sure you're more than familiar with risk management, but for clarity today, what I'm hoping to do is talk you through some identified areas of risk. The intention being that following the risk management process, as you can see on the screen there, as the risks have already been identified, you're able to then internally analyse and evaluate those risks in accordance with your own existing environment and framework, and determine what, if any, further action or risk management treatment you want to implement or initiate in the coming financial year. Now, obviously, every council is unique and will not only experience different types of risk, but it will potentially be willing to accept or pursue different levels of risk compared to other local governments. That being said, as an industry, there are undisputedly common risk exposures, not just within Queensland local governments, but in councils Australia-wide. And these risks have been identified by JLT Public Sector through feedback from 237 individual responses from senior local government executives across the country last year, which have been analysed and encapsulated in the latest JLT Public Sector Risk Report. The information provided by council CEOs and general managers then enables JLT to prepare this report for local government and utilise as a tool to guide discussions like this one and enable councils to consider how they're currently managing these risks and what, if anything, more they can do to bring these risks down to an acceptable level. The risks shown in this slide are the top 10 identified in the report. Now, it goes without saying that the last couple of years were unprecedented in terms of catastrophic events nationally and globally, and in one way or another, the impacts were felt by every council across the nation. The pandemic, bushfires, storms, floods, cyclones, and cyber attacks continue to impact Australia, with many councils being affected by multiple events. But it's worth noting that this year's report not only highlights the risks, but also shows the interconnection between them. As participants in the survey demonstrated through their responses, the impact of multiple risks occurring concurrently and sequentially, such as disasters and catastrophes impacting financial sustainability, infrastructure, and council assets. Another example might be risks related to cybersecurity, impacting on council business continuity planning, and potentially harming the organisation's reputation in the community. So I just wanted to talk you through those top 10 right now. Unsurprisingly, financial sustainability was ranked as the most concerning risk exposure for local government. This risk has consistently been number one in the JLT Public Risk Report for the 4 years that the report has been produced. 188 of the responses to the risk survey indicated that this was a high risk for their council, with 44 stating medium and 5 indicating low risk. Having looked at council's corporate plan, I can see already that you're well aware of this risk, noting your acknowledgement that maintaining access to an acceptable level of services across your region with funding levels expected to be available will both be a challenge and considered focus of council. Influencing factors for this risk, of course, include local government's revenue growing at an insufficient rate to cover increased operational costs, particularly in well-established local government areas where there is limited new housing development. Additionally, inadequate funding from both state and federal governments has also been cited as a key contributor to this risk, with specific concern around the ongoing maintenance of roads or past critical infrastructure. In second place was cybersecurity, which I'm sure we all know is one of the most pressing risks facing councils in Queensland, with implications for liability cover and financial sustainability. While the resilience of councils was tested due to the pandemic and events of the last 12 months, the introduction of more mobile and remote workforces and the significant emergence of cyber attacks across 2021 has further enhanced issues for councils to consider. Although cover is available through LGM liability relating to cybersecurity incidents, It's imperative that councils protect important information assets with secure systems which reduce the likelihood of breaches occurring in the first instance. Now, the QAL actually stated that in their opinion, cybersecurity is the biggest threat to local government. This is because cyber attacks are targeting entities such as councils and striking them with increasing intensity, frequency, and sophistication. On top of that, the Australian Cyber Security Centre's annual cyber threat report shows that the second highest number of cybersecurity incidents reported in the last financial year were across state, territory, and local governments. As cybersecurity has emerged to become a significant risk for all councils to consider, and given the potential impact a breach would have on the organisation, this issue can no longer be left solely in the domain of the IT department. Regarding assets and infrastructure, it's estimated that the value of community infrastructure assets managed by councils nationwide is more than $345 billion today. It's also estimated that local governments require a further $30 billion to ensure their assets remain productive and safe. There is a clear and obvious connection between the management of such a significant asset base and the financial sustainability of the industry. Unsurprisingly, the survey responses indicated concerns with the capacity of councils to finance improved assets and infrastructure resilience prior to disaster events occurring, as well as the exposure for councils to fund repairs or replacement, or betterment to minimise future events. As such, it's critical that councils develop and maintain dynamic asset management plans that provide both short and longer term perspective on the critical asset and infrastructure maintenance and replenishment requirements to enable a strategic approach to investment and the accessing of the grant funding available through the various state and federal channels. Again, having looked at council's corporate plan, I can see that council has already identified the need for contemporary asset management plans to be developed for each asset class, which will go a long way in mitigating the risks associated with the assets and infrastructure. It's also important that asset valuations are maintained to ensure that critical assets are valued accurately, and the consideration is given to whether the market or replacement value is the appropriate approach. For example, if a very old council-owned building is to be destroyed, would you restore the building to its original state, or would you choose to replace it with a more modern building? I'd encourage council to consider having a conversation with its LG and assets representative about this if it hasn't done so already. Related to that is the unpredictability of disaster events, with a notable concern indicated in response to the risk survey underpinning this report. Devastating bushfires and floods over the last couple of years in parts of the country have had a significant impact on local governments and their communities. The increasing scale and intensity of disaster events, combined with the cascading effect of chronic, recurrent and local stresses, has amplified the vulnerability of local communities. This demonstrates the importance of effective strategic and risk management planning to inform council decision making when considering disaster risks to mitigate. There's also the risk of reputation, which I'm sure council will acknowledge that councils are required to manage increasing pressure situations in addition to the day-to-day servicing of their community. And the loss of community confidence can undermine the good things that councils aiming to achieve and positive outcomes already being delivered. As such, reputational risk is a serious concern for local government. Now, elected members in the room will know better than anyone the growing expectations placed on their shoulders in representing the diverse communities throughout their region. It is an incredible challenge trying to balance undertakings with the fiscal responsibility of delivering best value administrative and community support. Simply put, this balance is not always possible, and failure to meet public demands and expectations may then unfortunately result in a loss of trust in both the administration and the elected body. A 2019 report published by the Risk Management Society suggests that there are 7 drivers of reputational risk to consider, being an organisation's ability to deliver high-quality products and services of good value, to be innovative, treat employees well, be open and transparent, take responsibility for its actions, have a clear vision for its future, and deliver strong financial results. Now, this report proposed that if an organisation is able to score well against these 7 drivers, people will generally give that organisation the benefit of the doubt, even in times of crisis. And this is what makes an organisation resilient to reputational risk. With that being said, given the increasing amount of responsibility and regulation being imposed on councils, local government has an explicit position as the closest level of government to the people it serves. And as such, councils are obviously in a unique situation when considering how to manage reputational risk. Further to earlier points raised regarding councils' capacity and capability to respond adequately to disaster and catastrophic events, related to that is the risk of business continuity planning and business interruptions to council operations. Safe, sustainable and resilient communities depend on well-managed and maintained local government infrastructure, functions and services with suitable plans in place to protect them. Whilst mitigating the impacts which natural disasters, communication outages, industrial accidents and other destructive events is certainly a challenge, it also cannot be overstated how important it is for critical business activities and services to continue through these and to recover as speedily as possible thereafter. Business continuity processes rely on clear, consistent communication with affected communities and stakeholders, as the effectiveness of any plans will surely be compromised if inadequate or ineffective communication strategies and processes are in place. One outcome of the COVID-19 pandemic is the importance of planning, even for the least likely of scenarios, and the role of business continuity planning is part of that, which ensures agility is integrated into business processes. Now, I don't want to tell you how this takes, but a starting point is to consider what are the services, functions and activities Council provides and undertakes on a regular basis, and then considering what resources are required for these, and in the event of a business disruption, which are the priority items that Council will seek to address first, because this information is what can form the foundations of any business continuity plan. One of the leading concerns surrounding risks relating to climate change and adaptation were identified by the survey responses is the implications of predicted climate change and the impact on business and council functions. One of the key sources and drivers of risk, there's a growing momentum surrounding the role of global heating plays in amplifying extreme weather and climate events, which contributes to those disaster-related risks that we've talked about already. Now, we all know that, as well as being a global pandemic and national health crisis, COVID-19 has severely affected local economies and the social fabric of many communities, with immense and far-reaching implications for local government in the short and long term. Although the initial whole of government and science-based response to the pandemic minimised the scale and severity of the health impacts experienced in other countries, the potential for rapid spread from new variants has been challenging. Of note is that in survey responses, while 60% indicated that their councils had emergency response plans in place relevant to the pandemic, only 31% had corresponding business continuity plans which identified and contemplated this risk exposure. This, coupled with the limited experience in managing a pandemic of the scale and magnitude, reduced the capacity and capability of many councils to effectively identify, understand and manage these risks. Rising administrative complexity and the cost of continuous change, with increasing and often competing statutory and regulatory compliance regimes remains a constant challenge in local government. Most councils simply do not have access to the necessary funding and revenue-raising opportunities that are capable of adequately responding and adapting to the changing and expanding regulatory compliance environment, which has a profound impact on the financial sustainability of the industry. Focus on governance through integrated planning, monitoring, reporting, and risk management that is founded on the principles of accountability, transparency, and stakeholder and public participation seems obvious and critical. Yet the costs to meet regulatory standards will simply remain out of reach for many councils. The Department of Local Government does publish compliance checklists to assist Queensland councils in meeting their obligations under the local government legislation. And I can tell you from personal experience that these helped me when I started working for Whitsunday Regional Council. But that being said, as you well know, those requirements only scratch the surface of what councils are ultimately accountable for, and a significant amount of risk remains. And the last risk in the top 10, finally, somewhat related to the previous risk of meeting statutory and regulatory requirements, is the additional risk of ineffective governance throughout the administration. Its council's ability to ensure compliance with applicable governance structures is under increased pressure. Failures to apply and monitor these structures has been an element in the escalation of claims in public liability, councils and offices, and crime coverts. Survey respondents noted that the challenges of managing elected member and employee behaviour was a leading concern, as well as issues arising from contractual arrangements, with the increasing prevalence required resources and attention to conduct investigations being specifically noted as ongoing concerns. So to conclude, I'd obviously like to thank you for your time and attention today. And I'd like to finish off with one of my favourite quotes, that risk is like fire. If controlled, it will help you, but if uncontrolled, it will rise and destroy you. Now, obviously, risk isn't necessarily a bad thing, and we all take risks, but it's how we identify risk, determine what level of risk we're comfortable with, and how we manage those risks that are outside of our tolerance, which is vital. And if Council ever needs assistance in reviewing or enhancing its risk management practices, then I'd be more than happy to help as a complementary part of your membership with LGMX. I'm a firm believer in the first part of solving any problem is by acknowledging that there is. And I accept that today I've raised more issues than solutions, but hopefully I've given you a reasonable amount to think about. And I hope you've asked yourself throughout if your council is managing the risks I've raised to a level that you're satisfied with. That being said, I'd be very keen to hear from you as to any other areas of risk that you may have thought of and were perhaps surprised when included. So if there's any thoughts around the room on that now, please feel free to share, or you can catch up with me another time which suits you. And again, thank you for your time today, councillors. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you. You have raised, so we've been working with QTC on our risk, and nothing really is a surprise that you've identified. The report showed a few differences between states on issues for local government, but yeah, I think financial sustainability, and I mean inherent within that for us is so many of the other things anyway. I mean, they're subheaded out, but any one of those other elements of risk affects our financial sustainability, both positively and negatively. I mean, natural disaster, for example, we view as a positive in some ways because it lowers things, but obviously it has community concerns. But yeah, so no, thank you. We are moving around in the risk space a lot more these days, and we've overhauled our corporate risk register, and there's now all of the associated platforms underneath that are being reviewed, and bringing it front of mind like this and seeing other local governments that are, similar to us or in the same geographic location having the same issues probably is reassuring that we're not going it alone. Thanks, Dave. Nothing else from you?
No, that's it from me. Thank you again for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to catching up with you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, David.
Did we move this, that we received this report?
We suspended standing orders.
Thank you. Councillor Peoples has moved. Councillor Arthur will second that we receive the JLT Public Sector Risk Report 2021. All in favour? 7-0. We will now return to agenda item 3.2.1. I think it's my report anyway, so I'll move it wherever it is. I move that my report be received. Seconded. Sorry? Yeah, I've got it now. Seconded. Councillor Plum, thank you. All in favour? Carried. Something that's not necessarily teased out within there is a number of phone calls that you could constitute as meetings with representatives of Ergon Energy and with some consultants who've been providing advice around Ergon Energy's failure to provide mains power to Alpha and Jericho, and at times to Motherboard. Just want to point out the work of the local federal member with respect to Motherboard. Some very informed community group feedback to his office he has called for Telstra to install at the Motherboard Exchange an automatically operated backup generator. It does address issues around the Motherboard Exchange losing power, and I think Minister Littleproud very much for really going into bat for that community. His staff have played a very vigilant eye on that little issue for him. The issue there, though, is you can have power at the Motherboard Exchange and they still can't have a phone call because another tower in the chain that links back through to Barcaldine loses power and the battery backup capacity there falls over. So unless I'm not in any way belittling what he's calling for. In fact, what he's calling for should actually be the standard procedure in every one of our small communities that Ergon fails to provide decent power to, which is all of them except for Barcaldine. But we need a more long-term approach to ensuring power interruptions are not continued. Now, recording devices at Alpha this calendar year have had 17 unplanned power interruptions. One in Aramac is running at 5. Another one in Motherboard is running at about 11. It's just wrong. That's just substandard third world rubbish. I've seen a number of briefing notes now that have been handed to the ministers outlining what needs to be done. The only reason they're being handed to the ministers is because I'm putting pressure on the Minister for Energy and the Deputy Premier to find out what we're going to do. Because if you remember, one of the benefits of one of the conditional elements that was pitched for Waratah to have a power station at Alpha was that Alpha and Jericho had to get power from it. Doesn't help Motherboard. But it definitely helps Alpha and Jericho. And then we've presented to Brisbane and said, well, now that's off the table, what are we going to do? We sort of had found a solution for Ergon's failings. They then said, well, we didn't know it was a problem. We go to Ergon say, oh, we knew it was a problem. Here it is. This is how many interruptions you've got. The Cremorne swears a failure, Lestry swears a failure, Pine Hills a failure, like just boom, 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 just can come back and through. It just tells us comprehensively how archaic and backward and old and how many systemic failings there are within the system. And Aramac North was also identified in that same briefing, Aramac and North and West. So, yeah, they're fully aware of it. Then subsequent briefing notes that have been sent to the ministers outlines a 3 to 5 year package of works doing 7 or 8K a year. They know the problem, but they're not fixing anything. In fact, there's going to be the entire Alpha town and rural community tomorrow will be without power for 6.5 hours, which is the third time now in 3 months, and the power situation is getting worse. So, following another meeting that I intend to have if we finish our general meeting today in time, online, I will be calling on Ergon Energy to cease all works on capital upgrades until such time as it is reviewed and designed in a way that it will affect real change, because it's my personal opinion that they are wasting money. Everything they're spending money on is doing nothing to fix the problem. It might fix the problem that was a problem yesterday, but the problem that is a problem tomorrow, it's all there. The whole system's old, it's worn out, it's never been maintained with the appropriate amount of money to keep it modern. And I mean, ultimately, whatever you are, it doesn't matter whether you're moving electrons, cattle, or water, whenever you've got to reverse something like Ergon does with power, bringing it from Lilyvale to here and then sending it all the way back to Alpha, that system will never, that's just ridiculous. There's just 140 kilometres of line being maintained when it shouldn't need to be. Build a Moonstone substation, the power can come straight out of the line into Alpha and Jericho, and the line from here that way's the fund. Supports a few properties, not entire communities. Now, I'm not an electrical engineer, but I do know that what they're doing is failing. Their focus is the same as what certain other industries use. They're working on workforce continuity instead of outcomes. They're looking to make sure that their crews, and this is being driven at some point at a local level as much as it is from above, but it's a systemic problem that Ergon have got across the state. They are fighting issues on how are we going to find enough work year in out for our workforce. So we'll just do a few Ks this year and a few Ks next year and a few kilometres a year after, and then, all that'll be good, all the poles are good, but we've got to go and reconductor them all. So then that'll be another 3 years' work. Then we've got to do all the bridges, which I've found is not actually something you use to get from one side of the creek to the other. It's a piece of wiring that where a pole angles goes around the corner. Oh, well, they all wear it, so we're going to go and do them. We'll do them over another 3-year process. So ultimately, by the time they get to the end of their asset renewal period, the assets they put in 15 years ago are going to get, pardon my language, but I'm getting hot about this. Ergon know they've got a problem. They're quite happy to sit in a room and put a beautiful slideshow together and say, oh, look at this, here's all your outage. Well, come and live at my place or come and live at Mrs. So-and-so's place in Alpha or Motherboard, and they can tell you this. Now, we've got somebody who's on life-saving oxygen and medical support in Motherboard who's been let down every time the power goes out, unplanned, for no reason. And of course, if he could make a phone call and get someone to come and help that person, it'd be okay. But guess what happens? The power goes out, the phone goes out. Like, it is absolutely next level bad. So unless Ergon can commit to doing the work quicker, my position is that Ergon need to stop doing any work until they work out how they can accelerate a package of work, because all they're doing is frustrating the living daylights out of people. People like myself that live on rural properties down there, we've all got generators, so we're fine. Apart from it blows everything up, we aren't actually living in the dark. Alpha Town go for hours and hours and hours, both in the middle of the day and in the middle of the night, with no power. Now, unless Ergon can look our ratepayers in the eye and say you all need, living in an urban community of Alpha, a backup generator on. You know, we had a blue clear sky day outage, and they were told because of the low voltage things, they get advised by the Ergon call centres, do not touch any fixture that has water in it. So they can't even have a shower. They can't turn a tap on to wash their hands. They can't cook a feed. They can't boil a jug on the stove, on a gas stove. Like, they're told, do not touch anything that has contact with water because of the potential for a spike through the water. Now, I'm not saying that they're being given bad advice. Obviously, none of us want to see a resident injured because of substandard power. But the reality is, Ergon, and so then the other thing that makes me frustrated is it's not a statewide issue, despite Ergon saying, oh, we've got ageing infrastructure across the state. If you go online any time of day and have a look at the outage map, right? Ergon very gratefully actually tell the whole world how many people don't have power at any one point in time. Alpha is the only area of the state that systematically, consistently appears in the outage finder, exactly the same number of people out of power. It is an Alpha Jericho issue consistently, and the problem with it up here is it only has to be for such a very short period of time, and they lose this. So the issue is different in that they're out of power for hours and hours down there, and they still have telephones. Up here, once you get past Aramak, you can't even use your telephone. And that affects landlines, that affects residential phones, that affects mobile phones, everything. It's just not good enough. So when you see stuff next week, that's what it's about. Ergon just, at a corporate level, refusing to invest in regional assets.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, I think some of their numbers, like you just said, there's 5 outages an hour. I think there were 6 in the night. And we had one this morning. I don't know, 30, 40 seconds. So I don't know if the numbers say
those numbers didn't come from Ergon, they came from private people that have got like a monitoring device that plugs in, so that's not an Ergon number.
Okay.
I do have the Ergon numbers. We do have it in that briefing. Sorry, I just don't have it now. Anyway, the rest of my meeting. I've met with CWAC and Red Ridge, aiming to develop a corporate uniform from the print of our local Indigenous artists. They have a number of prints that have been developed for a Red Ridge label. So we have so many different options in our shirts, and a lot of other government agencies are doing the same thing and embracing Indigenous art and culture. I asked whether there was, I initially said, could be design for us, and then the cost involved, I thought, well, for a start, perhaps if we could just use some existing material, a women's uniform and a men's uniform, and then when people are submitting their orders for upgraded uniforms or replacement uniforms. So that's a project that staff are now working through. See how we've got some feedback. Debbie's already given me some, but we'll just work through the mechanics of physically how we're going to arrange for. It'll probably be just a one-off thing for a start, just to see how it works, but I'll leave that to the officers to determine how it works. But it was a bit of an outreach to them about how we can promote, because the work, the physical artwork that was the genesis for the print has been developed by the ones that we've selected by Barcaldine Indigenous artists, so, or Barcaldine Council, sorry, area Indigenous artists from across our area. So it won't be a compulsory uniform, like none of our uniforms are, but the option's there for people who wish to. Councillors want to have one, attend celebration events like NAIDOC Week or so forth, Reconciliation March. Well, it'll be, so that's what that meeting, as well as also some discussions around the LGAQ Bush Councils meeting that will be here in July about a more or about an upgraded and involved acknowledgement of country with a bit of dance and a little bit, just making that one a bit special. So, as they all are. Questions? 331.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, all I can say is thank you for batting for the power. It's a huge problem. We all know it's a huge problem. Keep making a noise. Squeaky door gets the most oil area.
Yeah, we did in some quarters cop a bit of stick actually at council, because if this happened in Barcaldine Council, I'd be jumping up and down about it, and I saw red about that. Because I think that was a really disingenuous statement about council. We advocate very strongly on behalf of all of our citizens, and in fact, there probably isn't anyone in this council area affected more by the power outages than those who live in rural areas around Alpha, and they've been putting up with this for too long. But even though they've been putting up with it for too long, the situation in Mudabara actually is more front of mind for me. It's a bigger worry, because people around Alpha can still use a phone and ring for help. You know, Triple O can still hear from an Alpha resident. They can't after a very short period of time. When the power goes out in Aramac, she's all over for Mudabara within minutes. So there's a disaster element of that has me concerned. The Deputy Premier was briefed on that. Inspector Cook and the Telstra Regional General Manager for here, Rachel Cliff, have all been told that it's not good enough and it needs to be rectified. And obviously Minister Littleproud's on to helping to find a solution on his end as well. Yeah. 331, the Acting CEO's Information Report. Can I have someone move that we receive that report, please? Move to Councillor Plum, second to Councillor Gleeson. All in favour? 7-0. Brett.
Mr. Mayor, just a couple of things that so we lodged the Building Centre Regions Fund application for the Barcaldine Aquatic Centre. The beef corridors, so the priority, you can probably speak more on this than me, but had to appoint technical officers, the same as we do in Rapid, to be a part of that group, and then part of that assessment was the Alpha Tempo Rapid, so we had to submit a quote to have that rate sealed completely. That will go up then to the overall committee.
What they're looking to do, their councillors, is they've identified the unsealed state roads. They're looking at how much it'll cost to seal them. Unfortunately, one of the very few criteria for roads to be included is that they, well, not very few. The criteria is that they have to be in the local government area and identified by the state as a priority road. So fortunately for us, the Outback Regional Road Group has the Alpha Tembo Road as its number one priority road in the whole of the Outback Queensland, and so it easily fits the paradigm and probably will put it very close to the top of the tree within the Beef Corridor Council's roads. That grouping isn't looking for roads to be funded on a piecemeal approach. That the intent is to find out what it's going to cost to seal all of them and then release a package of funding that seals all of them in step with each other. So there's no winner or loser. They identify that there's gaps in the supply chain from east to west, north to south. They need to be fixed, not step by step, but holistically, which gives every council access to a bit of funding at the same time. The aim for it's federal. It's a federal aimed approach, and we'll have our steering meeting on Monday, which hopefully will give us almost sign off on that so we can commence the lobbying of the feds prior to the federal election. Yep.
Alpha and Jericho Water, I did distribute to councillors the previous report on the issues there, but I'm still waiting on the full report from the inspection that was held a few weeks ago. I was promised that it would be here yesterday, but that hasn't been received yet. But once I get that, then I'll update councillors on what we need to do to rectify the problems of both those plants. The BREZ, Barcode Renewable Energy Zone, so some shops representatives will be here on the 16th of March. So in which case they will request a meeting with councillors. The Barcode and Sewage Treatment Plant. Now, trickling filter is in a shipping container in Singapore Harbour. So we're just waiting. It was supposed to leave on the 12th.
Is the shipping container on a boat or has it fell off?
It's on a boat. So it came from Germany, was offloaded to Singapore. Apparently ships are being diverted to the US. But the shipping company advised that, a few weeks ago advised it was to be collected on the 12th of February, so I don't know whether that was actually has happened.
And if it was
It's on its
for the harbour, I was
not in the water, no.
No, right, that's all right.
It's not at the bottom of the harbour.
Might be getting commissioned a little faster than we think.
So we're really waiting on that equipment to arrive. The Alpha House, that's gone to the Minister. I'm just waiting on a response there. The showground users meetings that we held were very good. The actual request from the communities wasn't that great, really. It was a lot of
That great in size.
size, and it wasn't new buildings or big major infrastructure changes. It was more operational type requests.
And there were some really good discussions around the potential changing around fees, charges, utilisation, that sort of stuff was good.
And the Queensland Barefoot Water Ski Championships were held here on the weekend at the Rec Park. They were extremely impressed and very happy, except for the wind. So there's a bit of a lesson there that you can't have wind with barefoot water ski. We do have to. We want to cater to that type of event. We'd probably get to plant some trees in order to then break that wind. But yes, it was very successful. They got through all their round events. Unfortunately, they couldn't run any finals. It's too big. But there was enough points there for them to be able to allocate winners. And so hopefully they'll hold more events here in the future.
Just you may know, Jericho and Motherboard, their showgrounds, there's consultation underway. You're having a chat to the users, just getting them all in the one room wasn't possible, but you're following up on that. And Jericho, sorry, Paul, that's right, isn't it? Jericho consultation there, limited groups available, that's right.
Yes.
And there's not really any current.
Damien has spoken to the men's shed.
Yeah.
Location. And Paula and I are going to Motherboard maybe this week.
Yeah, we heard from the rodeo group in Jericho when we were out at Kim Ford's too, you know, and they were pretty happy. Everything was pretty right. They didn't really like. So, yeah, just if you're looking there and wondering, that's the other two haven't been neglected. They've just been logistical problems with Motherboard, and Jericho's just been smaller and not as much there for us to jump out of the box and do. The men's shed issue is, which we identified at council, been the bigger issue to worry about there. Right, questions for Brett?
Sorry, I just now mentioned that and the Motherboard showground is not actually owned by council. It's the rec ground is our
Yeah, sorry.
facility there.
Sorry, that's what I meant. Sorry, it's the rec grounds. We did. No questions? 332, can I have somebody move the councillor information and correspondence be received? Councillor Hanson moved, Plum second. Those in favour? 7-0. It's pretty simple. We can just go through this. Unless you've got questions. It is what it is. Any questions regarding any of those 6 pieces of correspondence?
The long drive for drought appears in our monthly magazine. It's got part of Jericho and
Very good.
mentioned to some stuff around the area.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. It was by both myself and officers individually. I acknowledged on behalf of all councillors that we'd received it and that the operational elements of it had been passed on to staff to consider, and that you would be notified for any budgetary considerations, which is what's in there. Okay, 334, I believe, because 3 is already done, although just as we skipped over 3, we didn't go through the figures there, Councillor Arthur, but the value of work so far for 21 continues to edge up. It's very impressive. Yeah.
Considerably improving on some of the previous years.
Correct. Okay. 334 Economic Development Report. Can I somebody move that we receive that report? Councillor Gleeson, seconded. Councillor Councillor Rogers. Apologies. Questions for Brett? Okay. I think I have some interests in 335. Oh, those in favour of receiving the report? 7-0. Thank you, Councillors Rogers and Arthur. Right. Before we receive anything here, the sculpture truck. She opted as to leave the room, not right. There was slight differences here. Some of this has been raised through our community consultation, identification through forward budgeted works, bulking up of the job. There's some money here that will be used in addition to already allocated funding. So we'll just go through them quickly, shall we? Alpha Showground upgrade. There's a number of capital components there that require investment. PA system, lights and electrical. It won't all be able to be done within that. And in fact, it may only be one of the three of those, if I'm right, officers. But until we get formal estimates, so they're all critical things that need to be done. If we allocate that money, we may be able to get one and a bit of them or one done. But until we get firm costings back, we couldn't actually say specifically which one of the three it'll be. So titling it that gives us the room to move to what we think is the best return for our money, whether upgrading of the electrical system or upgrading of the lights or which one. So that came out of our community consultation there with the users groups.
So, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, in all these articles, the grant can be submitted sort of open-endedly.
You put a little bit of information around it, keeping it vague enough to allow you to move, yes. So that's why you're not safe. Go all the way down to L, rural addressing signing. You don't need to say that it's going to be at the Port Wine turnoff and at the Beaumont Road or, so it's a package that will be done to upgrade rural addressing, and then we look at where is the area and what is the style of rural addressing we want to do, and it still fits within what we've said. What you wouldn't want to do is take that 100,000 for rural address signage and use it to fix the pool. Yep. Totally different deal. Yep. Whereas capital upgrades to community infrastructure at the Alpha Showground, we've identified we're going to spend 160,000 there on capital upgrades for the showground. Any one of those three things I just said are exactly that, an upgrade to the showground. So they're not getting away from the definition that goes in when you submit the grant. Is that right?
So, and just taking it back a step, we've already been allocated this money, so the grant's approved. So the government has said, you are getting 2.5 million, 2.6 million. We have to just submit a schedule of how we're going to spend that money. And they're encouraging us to bulk it up. So even this is probably too much in that they would probably say just put showgrounds upgrades and you would include barking Alpha in the one line. Yep. But so they encourage you to bulk it up as much as possible, not put individual items.
Which may be how they formally do it. The reason it's presented like that is so that you and the community know where we, as a council, are deciding to spend the money. If we just put showground upgrades for 450,000, that could mean anything to anyone. Whereas on that schedule, there's going to be some money spent. Alpha, Aramac, Barcald and Motherboard, not at the showgrounds, Jericho. Right, so Aramac, Harry Redford Centre air conditioning, Paula. That's just a replace. Replace evaporative with splits, is that right? Aramac, speak up, councillors, as we go if you want to question something here. Aramac, Jericho Road bitumen seal. We already have 400,000, is that correct?
We had 450,000 in the budget.
Roads to recovery and tourism infrastructure.
Just out of roads to recovery. Well, it was allocated to come out of roads to recovery. So rather than have two, then we're going to put 450 out of this program. So just to make the funding a quibble easier, put it all into one program and use 450 for another roads project.
Okay.
Within R2R. So that will get us about 2.6 kilometres of bitumen on that
That
road.
answers my question, to me. I was coming to you until I answered. What we don't need to do today is make a decision on where that 2.6 is going. What we're saying is that we will seal that, and whether if our previous resolutions have already called for the extension of, but if between now and when the project's done, officers bring back to us, or you go to officers with a resolution to say, well, we actually want to do 2.6 kilometres over these at this change, that can happen, because this isn't locked to change, it's just locked to that road. Once we nominate this project, we must seal on the Aramac Jericho road.
We will have to tell them to change, but in terms of getting this in,
You'll work off the previous resolution.
yeah, we'll work off the resolution. So the exact change. Once council discussed it, actually want to discuss it.
No, I don't. Aramac swimming pool upgrade, Paula, is that to finish off to extend the works that we're doing?
Yes, just finish the sludge pad and do a shade over the sludge pad.
Thank you. No problems. Otherwise, we would have had to fund that ourselves. Barcall and Town Hall floor and external wall. Jenny?
That's to do the floor with the resheet and the western wall. It's deteriorating quite badly if dust comes through.
Yep. Barcall and showground.
But to upgrade the toilet facilities at the sheep pavilion, and they fix a leak of water that appears to be in the grandstand kitchen dining area.
Okay. We picked up on the Barcall and, so West Tech and the Jockey Club have both reported, anyone who uses it, I guess, that there's toilets at the, the sheep pavilion. We're talking the same place, aren't we, Jenny?
Yes.
Yeah. Require upgrading, so that's been an identified community request. Any problems? Drummond Slopes Road upgrade. I personally checked this morning with Kevin about this to let you know that's approximately 1 point something kilometres, but he's costed, that's why it's a very precise figure.
Sorry.
Oh, no?
It is 48,000 was the its estimate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the 332 is the rounding out of the green.
So they'll get some guideposts on that road for their $332.
That is, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, is that also required?
That was done. He went directly to the resident who raised it with us at the community forum. He went and asked him that the areas, they went and had a look at it and worked out, and he believes that yes, that will do the areas that Gordon identified as the most at risk on that road. Subsequent to the community meeting, there's actually been a couple of nasty, not bad, but cars have gone a bit adrift and gone bush, and so yes, it probably does need doing. Just when it's wet, it's black soil, but it's the only black soil on a gravelled road, so people coming off it. And it's not Gordon's road. He's not advocating for his own road, but it happens to be in him, and that's why he's got to go and fix the road or pull someone back onto it or whatever. So. Look, that wasn't identified. I'll be upfront with every councillor here. That wasn't identified at all in our forward schedule, but nor were any rural roads. We've really picked up on a few through this last round of community consultation. We picked up some in that Jericho North area and Aramac East that have been picked up in other packages of work that are currently underway, some floodway upgrades and so forth, and we'll continue to budget more for. So that sort of has just popped up. A fair bit of the rest of that hasn't. But it's an opportunity to get a little upgrade like that funded because it's a long way from our depots. It's an expensive job for a short distance. If we can get it funded without us having to fund it, I think it's a good idea. So I'd support that going in there.
I 100% support it, but I'm just wondering whether that's enough money. Because as you just said, it's a long way up there.
I think there's going to be a bit of, I think Gordon might be going to help with the gravel push and that sort of stuff as he's done in the past. I don't know that because Kevin told me that. I just read between the lines with what Gordon said.
Yeah, no, Gordon did say that even at the users meeting.
That's right. That's what I
pushed up.
Yeah. Jericho men's shed, new shed, Damien.
Yeah, I would also add in with the mentioned people leaders to show them the site we're going to go.
which is roughly.
Roughly where the F troop is, there's a big old additional showrooms, so I've opened access away from the actual pavilion area that we've got over there as well.
So that's just as you're coming into the Jericho Showgrounds, councillors who mightn't be familiar with it,
Yes.
on your right. So it's between the Old Town Water Reservoir and the Showgrounds. Councillor Peoples, Plum, you know where that is?
Yep.
Hanson? Yep. Any problems? Motherboard Men's Shed, Paula?
Brett and I will go over next week and have a meeting with them to discuss possibilities of location.
But we're talking a similar size shed here, are we, for the two facilities? Like probably identical? Which, can we get rough dimensions just so we got, or we don't know yet?
Like 12 metre.
Okay.
Just, can I just ask here, the Motherboard mentioned, we haven't sold it yet.
No.
Right.
We haven't advertised.
So we still have a Motherboard mentioned, so we might not need this anyway if we don't sell it.
That's potentially the case, yes. Brett?
Yeah, the only thing, Mr. Mayor, is the cost of upgrading, any upgrades to the existing shed will be expensive. So we just got to weigh up, we have to weigh up. If we retain the existing shed,
So they, of course,
it will be, that's how it will be, yes. Unless they get grants, but
we sold it.
Sorry?
Didn't we sell it, didn't we? If we built it.
No, we
bought it.
We bought it, yeah.
Bought it.
That's why they've approached us to sell. They being the buyer, not the men's shed. Sorry, let me clarify that for the record.
We bought it.
And the aim would be, and we need to discuss with the community the location, but it'd be ideal if it's rec ground so that there's other facilities there, toilets, power. And then it's another building actually, and rec grounds that can be used for each day, maybe. The alternative is to put it on vacant parcel of land. But yeah, you don't have access to toilets and
Councillor Gleeson.
Mr. Mayor, while we're talking about Motherborough's shed, the Motterborough aircraft radio showgrounds, you said was not, is that not council?
No, that is. So where the campdraft is held at Motterborough is actually, we all call it the showgrounds just out of force of habit.
Yeah.
But it's actually the recreation grounds. We own that. But the showgrounds is what is formally known as the showgrounds, is combined with the racecourse complex.
That's right.
And that is privately owned. I'm looking because I need you to nod here, Paula, or shake your head and tell me I'm wrong. But it's owned by trustees. It'd be trustees that own it, same as the Jockey Club and Alpha. But it's what they know as their showgrounds is not where the campdraft is held. That's the rec grounds, which is owned by council.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I've got that right. Thank you. The next part is I know that the Motterborough needs a men's shed, but the Motterborough toilet facilities at the showgrounds is disgusting. You go over there for a function at the campdraft area. You go to the function. There's one pedestal toilet for the males, and I think there might be two for the females for 150, 200 people. I'm wondering where there's some money allocated to Motterborough.
We definitely do know that there's a problem with that because we applied for a grant to build a toilet block in Motterborough 2 years ago, 3. The old council that did it, 18, and we were knocked back. So definitely is an issue.
we did upgrade sewage, so we've got a sewage connection.
It's on sewage now. Yeah. Before that was probably 17.
So we spent hours on sewage upgrade to that facility a couple of years ago.
That doesn't help the number of toilets though. I mean, it helps you connect the new setup maybe, but it doesn't help access.
What's the grant to the, swimming pool in Motherboard?
So that's a deep clean and a self-dosing system, so manually dose. I think I did send the parent drive committee a contact for some portable toilets, so we're going to do a grant application. But they submitted to them.
We also looked at the idea of having a portable.
It
Right?
did.
If we're going to cover it all, and that's a
Yeah, but it got struck out of last year's budget. And it got struck out. It's not even in the forward years. We just drew a line through it. I was the only one advocating for it in the end.
We didn't draw a line through it, Mr Mayor. We wanted to change the.
Councillor's recollections and the officers and mine are very different about this. We wanted more and bigger.
We wanted more, and we wanted redesign, not draw a line through it, redesign, Mr Mayor. But continuing on from this, at some stage of the game, we've got to look into toilet blocks at Motherboard. Luckily, the swimming pool toilet block is open because half the people that go to the Motherboard functions hop on their push bike or ride a horse and go over to the swimming pool, to the toilets.
The portable option wouldn't be eligible for funding through this.
Would not be.
No. So I'm most happy to revisit with council's instructions for the budget, the portable toilet option, most definitely.
I'll move that.
You can't move that.
You second it, Tom?
Councillor Gleeson, that would be Councillor Plum.
Councillor Gleeson, would you like to move?
All right.
Would you like to
Are we in or are we out with the men's shed in Motherboard? I mean, what we're trying to do there is secure those two smaller communities access to a shed for their men and women that, in the case of Jericho, doesn't tie up the catering facility in another community asset. And in Motherboard, should council follow through with its decision to sell the existing facility that's utilised, well, they'll have somewhere to operate from. Councillor Hanson.
Just a suggestion, Mr Mayor, is that both those men sheds, can we really make sure that they go in a position or place that if the men shed ever closes down, we can utilise that shed for something else?
I totally agree. And that's why I think possibly locating the Motherboard one, like Jericho, at the showgrounds or the rec park, means that it could be used for storage, could be used for, you could convert the inside of it to toilets and showers if you wanted to, which, that to me, that makes sense. That even with portables, you could still, if it's in co-located, it's just it's a shed, it's not a house, so it's not limited. I would agree. I think I might have even mentioned too, Brett, about the idea, you could put it on a vacant block that we own in Motherboard, it might make it saleable down the track. It could tie it up too if the person buying a block of land doesn't want to shed it. So, or you might never get the value of your shed back. Land's only selling for 4,000 or 5,000. So, putting a shed like that at one of our community assets is probably better than tying up a vacant block of land. Councillor Peebles.
Oh, I agree with all that, Mr. Mayor. I agree with the men shed, the need for one if they want one. What annoys me a bit is that we were asked to buy this shed, I want it for a men shed, and we spent more money on doing electrical work and what have you to make this shed suitable, and now we're selling this shed and buying another shed.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Hey,
I couldn't agree with you more. There's lots of TV shows that come into my mind that I'm not going to air on camera for the sort of circle around decision that this has been. The greatest mistake that the last council probably made was actually buying that shed in the first place. And I mean the entire 4 years of the last council. That $50,000 decision was just madness in hindsight. Unfortunately, we can't answer. I think this is an attempt to redress, and unfortunately, whenever you spend money incorrectly, it always costs more money to fix it than it did to develop it. So the problem was last time we spent our money, this time we're spending someone else's.
Yeah, but we could be spending it elsewhere too, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, I totally agree. That's right.
Councillor Gleeson just raised it out to toilets that we need in another area that I've seen probably getting more use. We had our youth meeting in Aramac the other day, and there was probably, there's about $100,000 worth of works that we'd like to have in that list too. For the showground at Aramac, in regards to different things.
Not to take the gloss off any of those things, because this is not our budget. This is just one element of the capital works of our budget. We still have the opportunity to do all of those things that you both just mentioned that aren't on this list. I guess.
Maybe, I was just thinking that maybe we do put them on the list in the R2R money that's Brett's taken out of a couple of areas, we put that back in.
The pot of money's still the same, so whether it's in the combined amounts, it's still 900,000 on the Aramac Jericho Road that comes out of this right.
But we can't spend R2R money on toilet.
So, with regards to the Motherboard shed that we purchased, obviously we're going to keep a new shed, but it is that bias interest in buying?
We're in open meeting, but I haven't been told that the buyer's not interested in buying. So,
And Paul and I came either later this week or next week too, because we haven't done the consultation. We really do need to meet with them.
so is it? Do we put 100? See, we can build a sculpture trail toilet for 100,000. Do we put $100,000 with the 50 for the men's shed and build a shed and toilet? Like build a shed with code. If that's what you're thinking for Motherboard, do you do both of them at the same place?
Excuse me, Mr. Green.
Yeah, that's fine.
We have only seen this in the last 3 days, 2 days, whatever.
Well,
3 days. This.
with the dollar figures, yes, but keep going. We've had it for longer. I identified these last month to you.
The actual figure, yeah, okay. Do we need to have further discussion as a unit? Do we need to have further discussion? Should we move on to something else, or have we got to get this over and done with today?
We have to get it over and done today.
So this fair,
There is a time limit.
if the government calls an election tomorrow,
It's,
we may lose this funding.
thank you.
So we need to get this in.
Thank you.
Can you allocate Brett, more than what the total sum of funding is? So what I'm saying is, when we put in a toilet block, Motherboard anyway, or the Red Park, and the 100,000 for the Aramac show, and whatever the total thing was 2.4, put in 2.7. Or does it have to match the other pack? That's
You can make projects bigger and pay for it yourself.
Just put the extra.
Well, I would personally like to see some of the R2R money go to Jericho Road and fund the toilet and the showroom in Aramac. We've got R2R money there that you already had. I'd rather those things be nominated out of this.
What's the 100,000 at the showgrounds for?
There's extra elements, increasing the size of the arena, water can be run to different parts of the arena and out to the backyards. A lot of small type jobs, some lighting maybe if that football gets going. Maybe sort of a planning stage for that. We have, it doesn't like to do it.
And we have got funding. We're still spending 100,000, but we've got okay.
Yeah, and I think this is open funded too. We haven't got both of some of this other work yet. But it's coming.
Are we against anything that's on the list? So just to work through it so that we can see whether we take stuff in or out and do what you're suggesting. Narberthong Road, that's a kilometre and it's floodway, is that right? Rural addressing signage is to fix up, especially the rural areas around here. Is that right? Signage is not well.
Is that enough?
Sorry.
Would that be enough? Who knows?
We're getting quotes.
Stagmount Road, we've identified more than that $100,000 worth of them. So there's, depends which end of it you start, there's a bunch that need it.
Stagmount Road floodways was in the parks or half. So you put that back to life.
Do we need that toilet on the sub truck?
Well, there isn't one other than the lake. It's been asked for, yes, repeatedly. You get lots of inquiries, don't you? Yeah. Tourist operators have asked us repeatedly. I don't know what the location is that anyone wants to put it at, but
The aim is to put it with the Telstra. Wherever Telstra wants to put their base.
and is that the same place that the TMR funded stopping bay will go as well?
Stopping bays are right around.
Oh, there are heaps of them, isn't there?
Yeah, every sculpture will have a stopping bay.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, can we just add men's shed / toilet in Motherboard so it could go either way? Because if we don't sell the other men's shed that we've already got, we use that money for a toilet block instead.
Well, you must be very tight on the reporting in the report at the end of the day. It's at the moment the reporting by last year. We phase one. And they really need to see what we've done. You know, it's very detailed. Who's the profit office?
Yes, that's another aspect that's come in now. The federal government has asked Queensland Audit Office, which is their auditors, to audit these projects from now on. Well, they've got to audit last year's and they want these to be audited as well. So, yeah, so we do need to.
So then, to pick on both sides of that, do we transfer I to be Mudabara Rec Ground upgrade? Take the men's shed element out of it, take the word toilets out of it, we put 100 or 50 or whatever you want to into ensuring that, and then what that looks like, it will still be it will be an upgrade on the Mudabara Rec Grounds at that point. That's locking. The only problem is that locks you guys in your decision that this week with the community that the men's shed has to be there, but I can't for the life of me see why that's a problem.
Well, it doesn't have to be there, it's there it is. If it doesn't get there, we can build a toilet block with what we've got there, because it's outrageous and Jericho.
Correct. But I mean, if we want that to be a covered, like, if we want whatever upgrade we've been, if this is the mechanism we're going to fund the new men's shed for, and they said we don't want it at the rec grounds, well, it sort of wedges us a bit. But I just can't see how that's a problem. If we're giving them a brand new shed, the rec grounds are a better spot for it than where they are now, to be fair.
We want the utilisation of it.
Yeah.
Ourselves.
Especially if we do toilets and showers with it. Not showers, just toilets.
And we can add in that budget. So we've got till 2024 to spend this money. So in that budget process, we need to add to this we can.
So what about if M comes out and goes back into R2R and we transfer some of that up to the men's shed, not all of it, definitely not 100 of it, to allow for some toilets. Not a toilet block, certainly nothing on the scale of Aramac's $500,000 one, but the toilets, Council of Police, and like it's been called for by the community group for a while, so just putting some toilets, and I see the sense out of co-locating that with the men's shed, because if it becomes not the men's, A, it gives them a toilet for a start, and B, if it becomes not a men's shed, well, all of a sudden that other room then becomes quite useful.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, Mr.
So a portion of that floodways money goes up. If the floodways aren't deleted as a project, that just goes back into the R2R bucket.
And Mr. Mayor, I'd be putting the whole 100 with it, because you share 10 toilets, you're going to end up with 150 total. It's not a lot of money.
I don't know that we need all that. I was going to, if I'm in your hands, councillors, I think that's a lot of money. They don't need 27 toilets, and there's no showers required. It's literally just a few additional toilets, Councillor Gleeson.
Sorry?
It's just extra toilets that's required.
Mr. Mayor, I'd go, yeah. But with your wording, the Jericho Showgrounds upgrade, Motherboard Showgrounds upgrade, that'll leave it a little bit open-ended of what you're doing. And, yeah, and take some of that other money and put it to 50. And Mr. Mayor, you don't need extra money, or you can find extra money to Drummond slopes if you're happy with the 48,000 Drummond slopes on it.
No, if we needed additional funding to finish off what we're doing at Aramac, well, I was thinking we'd take the Stagmount Road floodways from within this scheme out, put 50 to Murrabburra, 50 out of this to Aramac, and then when the real quotes come in, if we need any more, we can look at what else we add to that through the budget process.
By doing that, Mr. Mayor, that's covering all the showgrounds. All your showgrounds are named there.
And the name of the grant is local roads and community infrastructure, so there's no bigger piece of community infrastructure than showgrounds. That gets some extra money to finish off things that are in play, and then for new things that are needed, well, we'll look at them in the budget process.
Okay.
Paula, will that get the projects that you're working on now enough funding to get them finished?
Yes, Mr. Smith, the sculpture trial toilet, everyone across the eco-friendly toilets are only around 20,000. Then you'll have to put them on site and fund them and stuff. 50 would probably suffice. It's not up there.
Well, now you've given me another angle to come at it from. Do we change sculpture trail toilet to public toilets? And then it doesn't matter where we put the toilets, they're covered by this.
Good idea.
I think if Telstra, we could contribute something to it.
Public rest areas, then public rest area upgrades, because then it could be the power or the water. If Telstra get the phone service and they wanted us to contribute to the power upgrade, public rest areas, and that then if we've got whatever you need to do that, and then whatever's left we can put into a rest area somewhere else, whatever that might be. Or maybe, we can put a covered toilet, I hope it's covered, a covered, little table rest area at the toilet, which will cost us not much either, but still it adds up and we end up going over budget and we all get cranky.
That Jericho showgrounds upgrade as well.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And same for Motherboard rec ground upgrade. Councillor Plum?
Yeah, it's pretty good. I think we get money on this.
And we have the capacity to do that, probably out of even roads to recover.
Sorry, councillor Plum.
On signage.
Just not sure that that's enough. Let's have a look at what we're going to get first. Well, sorry, reverse that. Let's have a look at what we need first, and then we know we've got 100,000 to start with, and if we need additional, we can either go to Roads to Recovery or council, or Works for Queensland or something else. But otherwise, you're happy,
Yep.
I'm happy with all that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Gleeson,
Yes.
Councillor Peoples. In that case, can I have a mover? Councillor Gleeson moves. Councillor Plum seconds. Those in favour. 5-0. Carry. No, Councillor Rogers, I reckon, comes back.
And Roger?
Only Rogers.
Councillor.
All right, sorry, we're back. 336, Local Government Grants and Subsidies Program.
So this, councillors, this is a 60% funding application. I'll go with B first. So there's been quite a few large number of upgrades required to all our council housing. So we've nominated that as one of the projects and allocated 400,000, which we only will receive a grant of 240, so council has to be 160,000 of its own money. And the item A is the town entrance beautification.
This may seem, especially coming from me, as an extravagant item. I have raised this, though, that I don't think our towns are necessarily as well presented as they could be in terms of the welcome element to them, whatever that might be. And I don't mean that it has to be a great big fancy sign. It could be anything, but the approach to a couple of our communities is marginal, to say the least, in Aramac and Barcaldine. Especially Aramac, I mean from the Motherboard Torrens Creek side, rubbish dump and so forth. Take a pretty beautiful thing to keep your eye off that. And the same here in Barcaldine from Blackwall. But what I was originally thinking about was, yes, a featured. Tourism is a significant element. I mean, agriculture is what carries our towns, but tourism is a significant element to it. And in some way, even local pride goes a long way towards people's sense of, contribution to the community. The signs that we have now are woefully inadequate. In fact, they're an embarrassment. They should be taken down. We need something that highlights the identity of our communities individually, but collectively as a local government. And that is a challenging thought. You would note to our east, the Central Highlands Regional Council uses a static, and I'm not saying I'm in love with this either, but to give you an idea of the concept that went into my mind, they've got a static type of display. So each community out of their 11 or whatever they have has 3 large stenciled signs, for want of a better word, that one of which has the name of the community and the industries or things about that community. So every community has different pictures, but it's the same style of welcome. So you can very clearly tell when you're not in the Central Highlands Regional Council when you approach a town. Now, we don't have to, I'm not saying to follow that, but I just think if we could get, I was hoping that we didn't have to put any money with it, but this is a great opportunity that's available and it certainly fits well and truly within it. I don't know how much it will cost. My initial thought was that we put it out there as one of the suggestions I have is that we put it as a prize to an artist and say, right, put it out to the public and say, well, we'll give you $50,000, $60,000 or $10,000 to whoever designs comes up with the design for our town entrances that we as a council like the most, and then we go and build them. And whether we build one of them a year or whether we build all 5 in 1 year, it would depend on it may not be a grand OIS scheme, like it could be grand in intent, but not necessarily in funding. It could be a garden bed design, or it could be I don't know, I'm the least most artistic person in town. I just know that our towns don't necessarily present well from an appeal point of view on arrival. You've got to get into the community to realise the beauty of all of our towns. Councillor Peters.
I'll move the motion, Mr. Mayor.
There you go. I was bracing myself for you to think that this was an extravagant waste of money. Councillor Gleeson, do you have any thoughts?
No, that's right.
Councillor Hanson.
I will second that motion.
Thank you. I have a mover and a second. Councillor Plum.
I think it's a great idea.
Councillor Rogers.
I'm fine with that.
This big soliloquy, I've been working myself up for this all week, thinking I'd have to defend this idea, and it's just everyone tells me to shut up and get on with it. So I will. Those in favour? Motion carried. 6-0. Councillor Arthur may rejoin us. Actually lost sleep over that. Because he declared a PCI on the basis of the house upgrades may require concrete. Oh, actually, sorry. I'm so sorry. I think you're still out. 338?
No, 337 more up.
But haven't we done 7? Oh.
I'll take advice from Deborah on this one.
I would take advice from Debbie on everything. Definitely don't listen to me, clearly. Oh, yeah. Operational plan. Apologies. Sorry, Councillor Gleeson.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I was just talking to Councillor Arthur.
My hearing slowly failing, but I think I got half of that. Right. Can I have somebody move that we receive the review, please? Councillor Plum moves. Seconded. Councillor Rogers. Those in favour? Carried. Questions? Councillors, do you want to just roll through these in order? Goal 1.
Now that we've, this is the bottom of each goal, now that we've got our accounting system in line with our corporate plan, within the actual and budget to reach those goals.
Okay, I just note finalised construction of the Rec Park water facility, phase 1. That's now listed as completed.
So phase 1 is the actual digging of the hole.
So how did that even make it into this year's operational plan?
Well, it wasn't open, so we were still dealing with the planning issues.
So what's phase 2 then?
It's the clubhouse.
So is it finished?
It will be finished. We're just waiting on sign off. I don't know if that happened yesterday.
I had the engineer had sent through what's the feedback from month's time?
So we just haven't got final sign off.
I'm asking this because I have a question from last meeting from Councillor Peoples around the time when the time shall expire, because he was a supplier to the construction of the Rec Park. So if it's got completed, so that has that now extinguishes his PCOI in that matter.
I believe so.
Thank you.
Right, paving's we've already reported on that, but that's been done surrounding the pool at Motherboard. Improved accessibility with pathways at the showgrounds, it's been done, so I'm all good with all this. Theme 2. Does anyone have any notes on this that they want to point us to? Because I'm right to keep rolling through it, so I don't want to bore you by reading stuff. If you want to go through it line by line, I'm happy to. If you've got notes, I'm happy to jump to them first.
So it's really significant that has changed since we looked at this. Sorry. I just,
Without looking back at the
yeah,
quarter one report, so things like the brick park, an obvious one that's completed. The pathways, so the Aramak, the Motherboard pool, they were completed in the previous round.
Can I just point to one thing that just seems to just keep boiling along, a slow bubble, not even boiling, probably lukewarm. Asset management plan. I'm not going to ask a question, are we getting any closer? Because the easy answer to that is yes, of course we are, further away than we were yesterday. But is there a time frame? Like, are we going to have dedicated asset management plans?
I had a meeting with the asset manager this morning. So he's been working with TBA. The asset registers turned out to be a lot more complicated than what we thought. So flagging the old data, it's just a time-consuming process. We've done the roads, and that took the final iterations. There's always adjustments, checking, find something else. So, I believe the water and sewage are almost complete. The airport.
Roads.
Roads is done. Oh, so the road register is done. Now we need to put that into the actual plan. Present that to council. Yes,
Because in value, road, water and sewage assets are our biggest, the rest are insignificant in dollar terms. That's not that outlandish statement. Yeah. But then water and sewage would be 2 and 3 after that. Airports and town halls and showgrounds and
buildings.
top over there, stitch, max. Okay, that's all. We just wanted to work.
Buildings are done. Buildings are a lot easier because they're obvious structures. And that will be discrete structures. So water and sewage is underground, a lot of it. Finding things like water main at the front. We didn't realise it was an old main. Hadn't been replaced, and they did the rest of the town. It's always. But I will present a report next meeting.
Well, I was just about to go one step further. Let's perhaps next meeting we have a budget workshop prior. Let's theme an hour or two of that let's run through all of our asset registers, what our asset plans are up to, like each element of our assets, I should say. Not run through each of the individual registers or plans, that's the steering committee's job, but let's just give us an update where each one's at, spend an hour on it, a bit more detailed information. You happy with that?
I might say already organised.
See?
for that day, Brett.
Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, you can call him Brett, you just can't call Councillor Gleeson Tom.
You just put that we will.
He's Brett and Jenny's Jenny, but Tom's Councillor Gleeson. Until the camera goes off. All right. That just jumped out at me then. So that's good. Let's have a look at those assets. because it'll be helpful for when we develop this same document as part, bear in mind, Council, as part of that budget process, once we actually work out where we're spending the money, is to go through this as we discussed last week. All right. I'm through to the end of it. Questions?
I've got some individual questions about some of the points.
Yep.
2.5. Preferred solution for regional waste collection identified. No action to date. I think it's in Vlad's report later on that we've gone to tender for some of that.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. The tender without Friday.
For what?
Collection.
Waste, yeah, so a bit different to that though. That's the regional solution. Or no, it's part of this.
Yeah, I would have thought no action to date is probably, we're doing something in that space around releasing a tender for the waste collection or something. We may be understating what we've done. But.
That's good work, Vlad. That's been an exhaustive amount of work to try and put that tender package together, so that's good.
And then the next point, video cameras installed at Barkle and Narrowmate. Have we got the second one put back up out here at Barkey or still waiting?
Still waiting. 3 of them still waiting.
Point 3.4, develop road and footpath design standards for towns to reduce. I would have thought someone like the Institute of Public Works Engineers Australia would have had a pro forma. Do we need to reinvent that wheel? It says not scheduled for 21-22.
Hang on. What we tried to do in the last year, there are standards, but I think that relates to which standard we're going to use. So we do have a meeting about, do we do 8 metre seals in town or 10 metre or what? Which way we're going? That's where public meetings.
Yeah.
When we went that is something particularly with the wide streets. But it is, I'm assuming that's what that means, is what standard we want to upgrade our street to, rather than design standards, it's the technical standards, but what is our standard street look like in each community?
And then I guess the next question with that, does our asset management stuff inform this, or it's a little bit circular, I guess, that they feed into each other and just keep going around? Yep.
Your asset management plan will say how much you're going to spend.
Because we've got our rural roads in that class, but we probably haven't got that in a town section, so the main street, the central business district, and then as we get further.
But even with the rural roads, like, is the 4 metre seals, 6 metre seal, what's standard gravel, like, we haven't really set that, what we're aiming for.
From a maintenance perspective, but not from a construct perspective. Yeah. Next question.
4.1, identify land available across each township. That's, I'd like to say, been percolating since I've been on council for 2 years. Because we are actively trying to sell land and buildings.
Which is different to that, because that's referenced, selling is referenced down the bottom, isn't it?
Yeah, but we can't sell it if we don't really know.
This is more privately owned stuff. I think that's what that line reference, I might be wrong.
It's more
Right, yeah.
than just selling. It's not identifying land for sale, it's more about, this is very much about what are we going to do to make it happen.
Because that's 4.5, I think, Councillor Arthur. The first theme in 4.5 was identify land parcels that are surplus to council's needs and a register of land to determine disposal strategies. So,
You're right. Okay, so that's got. work in progress.
It's the same sort of thing, which is obviously why it's in the
Yeah.
same theme, but slightly different. When we were within the planning framework, and then looking more about Barcaldine, especially and Alpha, when we're looking at significant potential for expansion, where do we want to expand? Doesn't matter who owns it. Where's those, those emerging zones that we created in the planning framework? That then was given a thing in this document for the officers to be aware of. Okay, well, what land is the emerging zone, for example, in the right spot?
Yep, right.
So one of the, and one of the tasks that is asked me to do is to identify all it, but it's private accounts. Just,
Or state reserve, or
yeah, don't just look at council land, go through and find every parcel of land that could be potentially developed.
so again, we've probably started that.
Because we've done our element of it. Yes, correct. So I'll give you a very specific example about this. Brett and I had a discussion about my thoughts. It wouldn't matter whether there was a gas explosion, expansion in gas, that's a really bad choice of vernacular. If there was a significant uptick in gas exploration around Aramac and Motherboard, which is where the gas is in our patch, there's not anywhere else. And it was one of those communities, or whether it was the breeze here, or if it's the coal mine at Alpha. My thought is, from a land release point of view, what council should be doing to ensure, I'm adamant that we should not allow a process to be put in place that devalues existing investment in a community, whether it's a house and land block or a privately owned land parcel in Mudabara or here. The first phase of our release of land or our investment strategy is we should be going to everyone who owns something that's available for upgrade, build a home on. So in amongst this community of Barcaldine, the pick on right here, there's vacant blocks everywhere that are owned by private individuals. Before we go and develop a whole new housing estate on the other side of town, which creates a two-speed economy, you've got the new town and the old town, we need to fill the old town up. We need vacant block. We need to give the opportunity. It's not our decision to force that, but we need to put in place a consultation framework and ensure the planning scheme prioritises development in existing industrial. There's so many reasons for that. It's already serviced by our trunk infrastructure. It means that people will potentially invest in upgrading existing houses that might. So the approach is then people that have already, over a longer period of time, chosen to invest in our communities get almost prioritised for phase one of the explosion in numbers in any one of our communities. And then once we've reached capacity in that respect, is when we then look at developing new. So I don't know if that was the conversation that pre-led that or vice versa, but I'm about looking after my approach, which is my personal approach, council hasn't endorsed, but is that we should be safeguarding the investment and the superannuation of people who've lived in our communities for generations before we expand in another area. But that kind of is what we're looking at there.
Yep.
But this is your document.
Oh, no, the next one was just a couple of questions about the asset management plan, but you've covered off on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe 5.8, policy review and review council's framework. I, as the councillor, would probably appreciate a bit more involvement. Like, instead of just giving us a policy, look at it for 4 days and then decide whether we accept it. Is it possible can we just receive it for 1 month and then a bit more time to, unless it's urgent, chew it over so that we can talk a little bit more to the community or have a bit more to think about it? Because sometimes you can read something quite quickly and we'll look at it and then think, oh, yeah, that's all good. And then it's only a week or so after, or once the minutes come out, someone says, oh, did you think about that? Oh, no, sorry, I didn't. Yeah. Because we're not directly involved in making policy, which I kind of think is one of our main jobs. We approve the policy, but we're not necessarily hands-on to generate the policy. We're just getting it, saying whether we might be happy with it, but yeah, if we were involved in it for a little bit longer, it may not look the same way that it comes out, if that makes any sense.
And that is, well, there's, that is fine.
Yeah. Oh, and I think part of it is about us taking more control over that policy, because it's really the only area that we have much control over. That budget.
The only comment I'd make is you can very much, but then I'd appreciate feedback in that one.
Yeah,
Right.
wait to that meeting, yeah.
And then we're just looking at the same document as we looked at the previous month, and, you know, before then rash decisions are made in the second one where it's,
Yeah.
I will change this and that without everyone having a chance to look at it, so.
Yeah.
If you're going to consult for a month, we do need feedback.
Yeah.
Ideally, if the Local Government Act wasn't what the regulations aren't what they are now, you'd have a workshop a week or two before the general meeting, discuss the potential changes that councillors want to it.
Yeah, and just a little bit of time to let it sink in and
Then present the amended policy the following month. Problem is, under the way the regulations now work, that's got to be an advertised meeting, minutes kept, cameras on,
Yep.
virtually, you know, so our ability to debate what we want in the policy, you may as well have a general meeting to do it. So I think we can do both. I think you're right. Unless it's a re-endorsing a policy on its age and you just want to rubber stamp it through, it's something that's got changes in it, receive the policy, promote changes throughout the month, bring it here, debate the policy change in the public setting.
and like the CEO said, like ideally 2 weeks out from the meeting, that's our deadline to provide some proper feedback to the policy formation change. And then if we haven't been heard by then, it's accepted that we're basically happy, unless something comes up in the meeting where
I agree with everything you said just there.
what's that, the deadline, councillor people?
You get in the council meeting, someone says something.
That's what I mean.
You change your mind, say, yeah, that's a better idea.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's why there was a bit of a caveat there. Like the discussion in the council meeting might trigger something. But ideally for officers, 2 weeks out, it gives them a bit of time to amend the policy or make changes on a markup to come back to. I think I've taken up enough time. Thank you, Mr.
Don't think you've taken up any too much or not enough. Any more questions regarding the review of the plan? Okay. 338. Brett?
Can I just go with me? What's Arthur's reason for leaving in this one?
He believes that because of the propensity for, so he's mentioned further in the regs, could benefit from the decision to sell or not sell.
Wouldn't that be the case for anyone in the city here?
Yeah.
And that's what the mayor raised. So it's no different to any other. Yes.
Lead on, Brett. I'll find it.
And also, he would say that if his employee purchases equipment like a grader or a truck, he's profit. Benefiting.
No, I just want to see why he was going in how it related to himself, but on.
So, Mr. Mayor, we've had a couple more issues arise about how we dispose of council assets. Other councils have an asset disposal policy, which we don't. So, to address that issue, presenting a draft policy to council under the local government regulations. The rules are set for disposing of assets over $5,000. They're also set for disposing of land. The Act regulations tell us what we have to do there. The $5,000 figure is set by council in terms of, and that relates to threshold for recognising assets. So really, policy is about, well, land and assets over $5,000 are described in policy. They're really set by legislation. The real guts of the policy is about assets less valued, less than $5,000. How do we dispose of those in a fair and equitable way? So there's also obsolete assets. Assets that are going to replace landfill, basically. What the main crux of the policy is in item 4, which is assets valued less than $5,000. And I've divided this into two groups: assets less than $500, assets between $500 and $5,000. So the assets between $500 and $5,000 has to be sold by auction tender to an agency or a community organisation or trade on a new asset. And it's less than $500, just that the CEO can sell by the most appropriate method.
Councillors? My initial feedback is I think the scope, Brett, probably should be a little bit different to what it is, because the policy statement goes on to clearly outline two key areas. 3, if you add in obsolete assets, it has non-current assets worth more than $5,000 and assets worth less than $5,000. The scope says that it's focusing on the disposal of valuable non-current asset and portable non-tractive items. I don't know that it's limited. I don't think the policy actually limits itself to that scope. So I think either we need to amend the scope to just simple and assets and other assets to the value of $5,000. Yeah, something to describe what you're encapsulating in the item 4, because as you're saying, really the whole policy has been developed for point 4 and point 5, really. That's the only feedback I have. I think it's immaterial to the chain, like the scope actually doesn't affect that in terms of readability, perhaps. That's all. Councillor Peters?
No, I agree with that. I just probably, with the scope of assets, I'd like to know that we are in that area of 500 to 5,000. I wouldn't mind a list coming to council so it's a fee. This is what I intend to put on an option side over the next month. I still think that the current assets that come to us for you, move on.
So what if we lifted from 500 to 1,000 and said that those assets between 1,000 and 5,000? Because they're little ones after that. The only reason I'm thinking it's like if you've got your stores officer or somebody, right, this is a list that's been identified on paper as for sale, and then they go through the depot and they're pulling out, oh, well, here's an old, I don't know, push mower or a desk or something that's stuck out the back of nowhere. Oh, we'll throw that in auction or clearing sale. If it has to come to, if we've already approved the list and it's not on it, then they'd have to hold it out. That's all. I'm just, if you put 1,000 as the bottom limit instead of 500,
yep,
and said that someone come up with the words, if that's what you want, 1,000, 5,000. CEO puts the list together. I don't know the words. I don't know how it fits into that gap.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Gary, Councillor Peoples, were you, the list that you were asking for, was that for us to approve it, or you just wanted us to at least be given a list, you know, of what had been sold, like, for the,
Councillor Rogers, I think I'd like to see what we sell.
before we sell it?
Yeah. And there might be 3 second-hand Toro lawnmowers. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Just look at what we're selling. It's public assets. Where you represent the public, I'd like to ask to have a say.
Thank you.
So, Mr Mayor, you're saying you want it raised to 1,000. What happens to the mower that councillor was talking about? What happens to it?
So it all goes through the same process. All I'm suggesting is if Councillor Peoples wants, my thought is that assets under $1,000 are going to be like a bit of timber, packs of timber, or something that was bought for a job left over, not needed, a pallet of bricks, something like. I personally am not sure that public scrutiny via elected members of assets of that lower value needs scrutiny. Once it gets to $1,000 in today's dollar terms, if it's, as Councillor People said, a Toro lawnmower, well, that comes here, we check, yep, righto, we're happy for them to go, whatever. Is that what you're suggesting, Councillor People?
Yeah.
So council people's at the bottom of point 3, where it's got the disposal of the asset must be authorised by the either conclusion the adopted budget or through a council resolution. If we put the disposal of an asset over $1,000,
Yep.
include the budget or council resolution.
Yep.
You're putting that where? You're putting that in?
Replicate.
Oh, you get replicate. Yeah. So you can leave.
Leave it there.
Yep.
And
change the 500 to 1,000.
Just through you, Mr Mayor, with item 3 and item 4, you could nearly combine them and just set anything over the value of $1,000 because they're basically both identical.
The only difference is the Act has specific rules for the $5,000 threshold. That's why it's there. Like, yes, I get your point, but the Act says that for assets above a certain value, you have to do this, and then you've got to create a rule for everything else. So even if our rules are identical, I think spelling it out separately shows that here's our conformance with the Act, and yes, I know it reads exactly the same underneath, but an auditor, God forbid, may not. Like, at least they can look at that and go, hang on, oh, yep, he's complying with the Act, instead of that you've got everything over 1,000. Well, hang on, where does it say what you're doing for over 5? Like, you've got to think like an auditor, and God forbid, not many of us in this room need to think like him. But Brett's been one, so he's right. I'm with you, promise, but I think just like, yeah, I think I'd recommend to councillors that we leave that delineation just to keep the auditor happy.
so it is a replication, but it is because the Act says over 5,000. Should keep that separate.
Councillor Peoples, just to get back to your point you raised at the beginning, Councillor Arthur has raised with me that under section 150 EI, A2, if the matter relates to a contract, or A is, if the matter is or relates to a contract between the local government and the council or a close associate, which he's deemed his employer to be, point 2 of that is the lease or sale of assets by the local government. Now, I know this is not a contract regarding the sale of, like it would be if he had put in a tender to buy one of their second-hand graders, to use that example, but it was the phrase sale of assets, and this was the exact policy name that had Councillor Arthur concerned. So I must caution using that he is elected to leave.
But under applying that to all of us, Mr Mayor, we don't know if there's going to be a council asset in the track. You know, maybe never, but there might be one of us here in this room that sees a council asset somewhere in the fact that you would be. But you don't know that sitting here today, do you?
I agree. I understand why Councillor Arthur is where he is at the moment, considering some matters that he has afoot, but
But from that point of view, we're still fine because we don't, staying.
well, my personal opinion is all councillors were fine, but Councillor Arthur's chosen on his own volition to leave.
Understand that.
I'm quite sure that the department will give us some very clear advice on this tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
And if they don't, we just keep making it up on the run. And I watched this video, Debbie, you questioned me for even saying that. So are we in or are we out with this policy now with those amendments? The amendments are that we've changed the threshold from 500 to 1,000, but we've also now included a line stating that those assets under 5,000 and above 1,000 can be disposed of only by either included in the adopted budget or through separate council resolution. Do I have a mover? Rogers seconds. Debate? None. Those in favour? 760. Carried. Councillor Arthur may rejoin us for trees. Or are we lunch? Oh, sorry, we're lunch. Informative conversation. Thank you for your contribution around the LRCIP. That actually was very meaningful. We're breaking for lunch, but that probably guided the outcome there, so thank you.